When I think about how I almost disappeared inside my own life, I remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't when Vanessa first started making those little comments about my weight. It wasn't when she accidentally texted my crush that embarrassing story from high school. It wasn't even when she showed up in the same dress as me to my birthday dinner, claiming she forgot what I told her I was wearing. No. It was the night I found myself standing in my bathroom at 2 a.m., staring at my reflection through tears, wondering when I had become so pathetic. Maybe Vanessa's right, I whispered to myself. Maybe I am too sensitive, too needy, too much. I didn't recognize the hollow-eyed woman looking back at me. Somewhere along the way, my voice had become a whisper, my dreams had shrunk to fit someone else's comfort, and my worth had become measured in Vanessa's approval. How had this happened? When had I handed over the keys to my self-esteem to someone who treated them so carelessly? 7 years of friendship, and I couldn't pinpoint when the poison had started seeping in. We met during our sophomore year of college, both of us transferred into the same communications program at NYU. I was the quiet Midwestern transplant still finding my footing in the city. Vanessa was Brooklyn-born with the kind of effortless confidence I'd always envied. She wore vintage leather jackets and red lipstick at 9 a.m. lectures. She spoke up in class while I swallowed my thoughts. She seemed to float through crowds while I pressed myself against walls. "You," she said, pointing at me after our media ethics lecture one Thursday, "have the best notes I've ever seen. Like, psychotically organized. I need you in my life." Just like that. No preamble. No small talk. Vanessa decided we would be friends, and so we were. Within weeks, we were inseparable. She pulled me into her orbit, introducing me to her wide circle of friends, dragging me to gallery openings in Chelsea and secret basement concerts in Bushwick, places I would never have found the courage to go alone. With Vanessa by my side, doors opened. The city, which had felt so overwhelming before, now seemed full of possibility. "You just needed someone to show you how to live a little," she'd say, linking her arm through mine as we walked home from some party where she'd introduced me as my brilliant friend Emma, who's going to run a media empire someday. The way she believed in me made me believe in myself. When my application for the summer internship at the Atlantic was rejected, she showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and a plan. "Screw them. We're starting our own blog. Right now." She opened her laptop and bought the domain name before I could protest. EmmaandVanessa.com. The world isn't ready. That night, as we brainstormed content ideas until 3 a.m., I remember thinking I had finally found my person. The sister I never had. The one who saw the best in me, who pushed me to be braver, who made me feel like I belonged somewhere. How could I have known, then, that the same hands lifting me up would eventually be the ones holding me underwater? It started subtly. So subtly that for years, I couldn't see it happening. Junior year, we moved into an apartment together off campus with another friend, Tasha. Our blog had gained a small but loyal following. We were both interning at media companies, me at a small progressive news outlet, Vanessa at a glossier lifestyle publication. On paper, we were still the perfect friendship, the kind other people envied. "You two are like the same person," people would say. And I'd smile, taking it as a compliment, not realizing that was precisely the problem. In Vanessa's mind, there wasn't room for two of us. The comments started as jokes, tiny paper cuts that stung for a moment before I dismissed them. "That shirt's so cute. It really hides your arms. I can't believe you got the Sanderson interview. They must have been desperate after their first choice fell through. Oh, you're wearing your hair like that again? Bold choice." Always followed by a laugh or a quick hug. Always easily explained away when I felt that flicker of hurt. I was being too sensitive. She was just being honest. That was Vanessa, brutally truthful, but that's why I loved her, right? When our blog started getting attention from a few media insiders, the dynamic shifted further. Posts I wrote received constructive feedback from Vanessa that left me rewriting until 4 a.m. Meanwhile, her articles were published untouched. "I just want us to look professional," she'd say. "You understand?" And I did understand. I understood that whatever I produced wasn't quite good enough, that I needed her polishing to shine, that her name came first in our shared bylines for a reason. By senior year, my confidence in my writing, the one thing I'd always been sure of, had eroded to almost nothing. I'd stare at blank documents for hours, second-guessing every word. What would Vanessa say? How would she critique this? Was this idea even worth pursuing? But it was more than just the writing. It was everything. If I got a new dress, that color doesn't really work with your skin tone, but you do you. If I mentioned a date, he asked you out? That's interesting. He always struck me as having a very specific type. If I received praise from a professor, Professor Davis is just being nice. You know how he feels bad for the scholarship kids. Each comment was a tiny brick in a wall being built between me and my sense of self. Each joke was another thread in the web of insecurity being spun around me. And through it all, Vanessa remained my best friend. The person I called first with news, the shoulder I cried on, the voice I trusted most in the world. Which is why, when everything finally shattered, I had no idea who to turn to. Because how do you explain to people that the person you've held up as your closest friend for years has actually been slowly destroying you? How do you admit that you've been too blind, too desperate for approval, too afraid of being alone to see what was happening? How do you tell that story without making yourself the fool? The cruelest part of a toxic friendship is how invisible it is to outsiders. When you're in an obviously abusive romantic relationship, people notice. They see the controlling behavior, the tears, the withdrawn social life. But toxic friendships, they hide in plain sight, especially when your friend is someone like Vanessa. To everyone else, Vanessa was the perfect best friend. The one who organized my surprise birthday parties, who posted glowing tributes to me on Instagram with carefully filtered photos and captions like, "So proud of this talented soul." #blessed to know her #soul sister. The one who cheered the loudest at my presentations and who drunkenly told strangers at parties how freaking brilliant I was. Our senior year, when I landed a competitive fellowship that would fund a documentary project on women in media, Vanessa threw me a congratulatory dinner. She invited 15 of our friends to an expensive restaurant I could never have afforded. She made a toast that brought tears to my eyes about how I deserved every success and how she'd known from day one that I was destined for greatness. And then, as everyone clinked glasses, she leaned close and whispered, "Just remember who introduced you to Professor Michaels. He was my contact first." That was how it always went. Public celebration, private reclamation. What she gave with one hand, she took back with the other, but so smoothly that I constantly doubted my own perceptions. Was I being ungrateful? Was I misremembering who had introduced me to the professor who eventually nominated me for the fellowship? Was I the bad friend for not giving her enough credit? "You know," she said later that night as we walked home, both of us a little tipsy from the wine, "I was going to apply for that fellowship too. But I knew how much you needed a win." The implication hung in the air. She had stepped aside for me. She could have had it if she wanted. My achievement was actually her sacrifice. I remember mumbling something about how she should have applied, that she would have been amazing. Immediately diminishing my own accomplishment. Making myself smaller to soothe her ego. It was a dance I had learned to perform perfectly. Our blog continued to grow throughout senior year. What had started as a late-night project born from rejection had evolved into something that was actually opening doors for us. We were invited to events as influencers, though I always cringe at the term. PR firms sent us free products to review. A small but respected media company even approached us about potentially acquiring the site. I still loved writing for the blog. It was the one space where I felt my voice mattered, even if Vanessa edited my words heavily. But as graduation approached and the acquisition talks became more serious, something shifted between us. "We need to talk about the future of the site," Vanessa said one night, placing a legal document on our kitchen table. We were sitting in our apartment. Tasha was out for the evening. "I've drawn up some paperwork about ownership." I stared at the document, confused. "Ownership? I thought we were co-founders. Equal partners." Vanessa gave me that look, the one that made me feel naive, like I was missing something obvious. "Emma, honey, let's be real. The blog was my idea. I bought the domain. I'm the one with the industry connections. I'm the one who's been steering our content strategy." She slid the papers closer to me. "This just formalizes what we already know. I'll own 70%. You'll have 30%. Still partners, just reflecting our contributions realistically." My stomach dropped. The blog had been our shared baby. Our late nights, our joint effort. Yes, she bought the domain, but I designed the site. Yes, she had more connections, but I wrote twice as many articles. I managed all the analytics, the email newsletter, the community engagement. That doesn't seem fair, I said quietly, surprised by my own defiance. Something flashed across Vanessa's face, irritation? Surprise? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. Look, she said, her voice softening. I'm just thinking about our futures. You know I love working with you, but this is business. And if this acquisition goes through, we need to be clear about who gets what. She reached for my hand. Plus, you got that amazing fellowship. You're going to be making that documentary. You'll have that whole project to yourself. I'm just trying to balance things out. There it was again. The implication that I was being greedy. That I already had enough success. That wanting equal credit for our joint venture was somehow taking too much. I didn't sign the papers that night. I told her I needed to think about it. Maybe consult with someone first. She agreed, but her smile had an edge to it. Of course, think about it. But don't take too long. The acquisition meeting is next week, and we need to present a united front. She slid the papers into a folder. And maybe don't mention this to anyone else just yet. Business stuff can get so complicated, and people love to give uninformed opinions. I nodded, already feeling guilty for causing tension. Already wondering if I was the one being unreasonable. That night, I called my mom back in Ohio. I didn't tell her about the ownership dispute. Vanessa was right about one thing. I did tend to let others' opinions cloud my judgment. Instead, I just asked how she was. Let her tell me about the neighborhood gossip, about my dad's garden project, about my younger brother's college applications. You sound tired, honey, Mom said eventually. Everything okay with school? With the apartment? Everything's fine, I lied. Just busy. Graduation coming up. Lots of decisions. And how's Vanessa? Still attached at the hip, you too? I hesitated. She's good. Busy too. Mom was quiet for a moment. You know, Emma, I've been meaning to ask, do you have plans to get your own place after graduation? Now that you have that fellowship, you might want your own space to work. Something just for you. The question caught me off guard. Vanessa and I had always assumed we'd keep living together after college. We talked about finding a nicer apartment, maybe in Brooklyn. It hadn't occurred to me that we could, or should, separate our lives. I haven't really thought about it, I admitted. Well, maybe you should, Mom said gently. Sometimes it's good to have your own corner of the world, especially when you're starting your career. After we hung up, I sat on my bed and really considered what it would be like to live without Vanessa. To make decisions without consulting her first. To write without her looking over my shoulder. To come and go without explaining myself. To decorate a space that was fully mine, not a compromise. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I didn't know it then, but that small seed of independence my mother had planted would eventually grow into the strength I needed to save myself. But first, things would have to get much, much worse. Looking back, I can see that Vanessa never wanted a friend. She wanted an audience, a cheerleader, a sidekick who would make her look good by comparison. The problem was, I kept forgetting to stay in my assigned role. A week after our conversation about the blog ownership, I received an email that would change everything. It was from Marcus Chun, a senior editor at Pulse Media, the company interested in acquiring our blog. But instead of addressing both of us, the email was sent only to me. Emma, I was impressed by your writing portfolio and the vision you shared during our initial meeting. I'd like to discuss a potential staff writer position with you, separate from the blog acquisition talks. Are you free for coffee this week? I stared at the email for a full 5 minutes, reading and rereading it. A job offer. For me specifically, it was everything I'd been working toward. A paid position at a respected digital media company. A foot in the door of the industry I'd dreamed of joining. My first instinct, shamefully, was to hide it from Vanessa. My second instinct was to feel guilty about that first instinct. My third was to forward the email to her immediately, which is what I did. I added a quick note. Not sure why he only emailed me. Should I suggest including you in the meeting? Her response came within minutes. Don't worry about it. Take the meeting, see what he has to say. We'll discuss after. So proud of you. 2 hearts. The exclamation points and heart emoji didn't match the cold feeling that settled in my stomach. Something about her response felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I met Marcus at a coffee shop near the Pulse Media offices the next day. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a relaxed demeanor that put me at ease. "Your pieces on the blog have a unique voice," he said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "Especially the series on women in gaming and the media coverage of climate activism. That's the kind of perspective we're looking to add to our team." I felt a flush of pride, followed immediately by confusion. Those were indeed my pieces, but they had been published under our joint byline. How did he know which ones I'd written? When I asked, Marcus looked equally confused. "Vanessa told me," he said simply. "When we met for drinks last month, she walked me through who wrote what on the site. She spoke very highly of your work, said you were the real writer of the partnership while she handled more of the business and networking side." I nearly choked on my coffee. Vanessa had met with Marcus privately a month ago. She'd never mentioned it, and while I was touched that she'd apparently praised my writing, something about the situation felt calculated, like she was playing chess while I was still trying to set up the checkers board. The meeting continued, with Marcus outlining what the position would entail. The salary was modest but fair for an entry-level role. The opportunities for growth were significant. It was, by any measure, a fantastic opportunity. "What about the blog acquisition?" I asked finally. "Where does that stand?" Marcus hesitated. "To be honest, we're more interested in bringing on talent than acquiring another platform." Vanessa seemed to understand that when we spoke. I got the impression she was exploring other options for the blog. Other options? What other options? I left the meeting with a job offer letter in my bag and a knot of confusion in my chest. When I got back to the apartment, Vanessa was waiting, perched on the couch with an expectant smile. "So, how did it go? Tell me everything." I sat down across from her, trying to organize my thoughts. "It went well. They're offering me a staff writer position." "Emma, that's amazing." She jumped up to hug me, her enthusiasm seemingly genuine. "See, I always knew you were talented. What did I tell you?" "Marcus mentioned that you two met for drinks last month," I said carefully, watching her reaction. "He said you told him which articles on the blog were mine." Vanessa's smile flickered only slightly. "Oh, that? Yeah, he reached out to me about possibly contributing some freelance pieces, and we got to talking about the blog. I made sure to highlight your work. You know I'm always your biggest cheerleader." "Why didn't you tell me about the meeting?" She waved dismissively. "It wasn't a big deal. Just a casual drink. And nothing came of it for me, so why bring it up?" She leaned forward, eyes bright. "So, are you going to take the job?" I nodded slowly. "I think so. But what about the blog?" Marcus said they're not really interested in acquiring it anymore. "Yeah, I figured that might happen," Vanessa said, her tone still light. "But don't worry about it. I've been talking to a couple other companies that might be interested. Smaller ones, but with more growth potential." "You've been talking to other companies? When were you going to tell me about that?" For the first time, irritation flashed across her face. "Emma, come on. I've been handling the business side of things from the beginning. You focus on the writing, I focus on the strategy. That's how we work." "But we're supposed to be partners," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "Equal partners. You can't just make decisions about our shared business without consulting me." Vanessa looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed dramatically. "I was trying to protect you. The acquisition talks weren't going well, and I didn't want you to worry. I was exploring alternatives so that all the pressure wouldn't be on you." She crossed her arms. "But I guess now that you have a job offer, you don't really need the blog anymore, right? So it doesn't actually matter what happens to it." The guilt hit me like a wave. She was right. With this job offer, I was less dependent on the blog's success. Was I being selfish for questioning her methods when she'd been working to save our shared project? "I still care about the blog," I said quietly. "It's important to me. We built it together." "Did we, though?" Vanessa's voice had an edge now. "Be honest, Emma. If it weren't for me pushing you, networking for us, handling all the business emails and negotiations, where would the blog be? Where would you be?" The question landed like a slap. Where would I be without Vanessa? It was a question I'd never really allowed myself to consider. She had been so central to my college experience, my social life, my professional development. Could I even separate my achievements from her influence anymore? I don't know, I admitted. She softened immediately, coming to sit beside me on the couch. Hey, I didn't mean it like that. Of course you're talented on your own. I just meant we're a team. We help each other. And sometimes that means one of us has to take the lead while the other gets an amazing opportunity. She squeezed my hand. Like you and this job offer. I'm genuinely happy for you. Really? Graduation came and went in a blur of ceremonies, champagne toasts, and tearful goodbyes. Our friend Tasha moved back to Chicago. Other classmates scattered across the country for jobs or graduate programs. But Vanessa and I remained in New York, still sharing our apartment, though our professional lives were diverging for the first time. I started my job at Pulse Media, throwing myself into the work with an enthusiasm born partly of genuine passion and partly of the desperate need to prove, to myself as much as to anyone else, that I deserved this opportunity. Vanessa, meanwhile, announced she had accepted a position at Vanguard, a prestigious PR firm known for representing media companies and startups. She also continued working on the blog, though her updates became less frequent. When I offered to still contribute articles on weekends, she waved me off. You focus on your new job, she said magnanimously. I've got the blog covered. Over the next few months, something subtle shifted in our social circle. The friends we'd shared throughout college, the ones who remained in New York, seemed to drift toward Vanessa. Weekend brunches happened without me. Happy hours were planned when I had deadlines. Instagram stories showed gatherings I hadn't been invited to. When I mentioned it to Vanessa, she looked surprised. I thought you were too busy with work. You're always talking about your deadlines and how much you love your new job. No one wanted to bother you. She tilted her head. Plus, people's lives move in different directions after college. It's natural. It was true that I was busy. My job at Pulse was demanding, with long hours and high expectations. But I still needed friends, still needed a social life. When had respecting my work schedule turned into complete exclusion. I tried to reconnect, texting our mutual friends directly to make plans. The responses were polite, but oddly distant. Sure, maybe sometime. Let's definitely catch up soon. But specific invitations were met with excuses or vague deferrals. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a coffee shop near our apartment that I began to understand why. I was working on a Saturday afternoon when Maya, one of our college friends, walked in. She didn't see me at first, tucked away in the corner with my laptop. When she did notice me, she looked startled, almost guilty. Emma! Hey, how are you? Good. Just working on an article. Do you want to join me? I could use a break. Maya hesitated, glancing at her watch. I can sit for a few minutes, I guess. As she settled across from me, I noticed her discomfort. We'd been close once, not best friends, but solidly in each other's orbit. Now she could barely meet my eyes. So how have you been? I asked. I feel like I haven't seen you in ages. Yeah, it's been a while. She fidgeted with her coffee cup. Work keeps me pretty busy. You know how it is. Definitely. But we should catch up properly sometime. Maybe dinner next week. Maya's smile was strained. That sounds nice. I'll check my schedule. The awkward silence that followed was painful. Finally, I decided to be direct. Maya, did I do something wrong? You seem uncomfortable. She looked up, startled. No, of course not. She bit her lip. It's just, I don't want to get caught in the middle of anything. The middle of what? Maya sighed. Look, Vanessa's been concerned about you. She says you've been really stressed with a new job, that you've been snapping at her, that you get angry when she tries to include you in things. I stared at her, speechless. None of that was true. If anything, Vanessa had been the one growing distant, canceling our roommate dinner nights, returning home late without explanation. That's not. And the thing with Jake, Maya continued, lowering her voice. That was pretty harsh. Jake? What thing with Jake? Maya looked increasingly uncomfortable. The way you freaked out when Vanessa started seeing him. She said you had a meltdown, accused her of betraying you. Jake? It took me a moment to place the name. Then I remembered, Jake Mitchell, a guy I'd gone on 2 dates with earlier in the summer. It hadn't worked out. We had different interests, different energies. I hadn't thought about him in months. Vanessa is dating Jake? I asked, genuinely confused. Maya's eyes widened. You didn't know? They've been together for like 6 weeks. She said you gave her your blessing. My head was spinning. Not only had Vanessa apparently started dating someone I'd briefly seen, without mentioning it to me, but she'd constructed an entire narrative about my supposed meltdown over it. Maya, I had no idea they were dating. Vanessa never told me, and I certainly never had a meltdown about it. Now it was Maya's turn to look confused. But she said, she told us all that you've been acting really possessive, that you claimed she was trying to steal your life, or something. That's why everyone's been giving you space. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa had been systematically turning our friends against me, painting me as unstable, possessive, difficult. No wonder no one wanted to hang out with me. They all thought I was having some kind of breakdown. None of that is true, I said quietly. None of it. Maya looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I had a feeling something was off. The way she talks about you lately, it doesn't match the Emma I know. That conversation was the first crack in the wall Vanessa had built around me. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to other friends individually, not to confront them about Vanessa's lies, but simply to reconnect on my own terms. Some remained distant, fully bought into whatever narrative Vanessa had spun. But others, like Maya, seemed relieved to hear directly from me, to see that I wasn't the volatile, jealous person they'd been told about. Meanwhile, living with Vanessa became increasingly tense. I never confronted her about what I'd learned from Maya. Some instinct warned me that direct confrontation would only lead to more elaborate lies. Instead, I began to quietly disentangle my life from hers. I stopped sharing details about my work. I made plans without telling her where I was going or with whom. I started looking at apartment listings, considering the possibility of moving out when our lease ended in 3 months. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because the alternative, that my best friend was manipulating me, competing with me, maybe even sabotaging me, was too painful to consider. Thanks, I said. And I'm sorry for getting worked up. You're right, you've always handled the business side better than I could. She smiled, crisis averted. So we're good. You'll take the job, I'll keep exploring options for the blog, and we'll figure out our next steps together. I nodded, pushing down the lingering doubt. Perfect. She bounced up from the couch. This calls for celebration. Dinner tonight. I'll invite the crew. My treat. As she pulled out her phone to text our friends, I watched her, trying to reconcile the Vanessa who supposedly praised my work to potential employers with the Vanessa who just implied I'd be nothing without her. The Vanessa who threw me congratulatory parties with the Vanessa who reminded me that my achievements were at least partly hers. For the first time, I wondered if these weren't contradictions at all. If maybe, just maybe, they were two sides of the same strategy. Keep Emma close, keep Emma grateful, keep Emma dependent, but make sure Emma never outshines Vanessa. It was a terrifying thought, one I wasn't ready to fully acknowledge yet. But once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Like a small crack in a windshield that you know will eventually spread. Vanessa noticed the change, of course. Her response was to alternate between concerned questioning, "Are you okay? You seem distant lately," and subtle jabs designed to make me doubt myself. "Your new work friends seem interesting. Not really your usual type, are they?" One night, she came home to find me on the phone with my mother, discussing the possibility of moving to my own place. I hadn't mentioned specific reasons, just that I thought it might be time for a change. When I hung up, Vanessa was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, her expression unreadable. "You're thinking of moving out?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe. Just exploring options before our lease is up." She nodded slowly. "Because of money? I know your job doesn't pay much. If that's the issue, we could work something out with the rent split." "It's not about money," I said. "I just think it might be good for both of us to have our own spaces. We're not in college anymore." "Right." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Growing up and moving on. I get it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Just remember, Emma, friendships take work. If you're going through something, pushing people away isn't the answer. I'm still here for you, even if you don't think you need me anymore." The words were perfect, concerned, supportive, mature. But the chill behind them sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same message she'd apparently been spreading to our friends. Emma is pushing people away. Emma is the problem. Emma is unstable. As I listened to her footsteps retreating down the hall, I realized that the distance I'd been creating wasn't just physical. It was emotional, mental. I was finally beginning to see Vanessa clearly, without the filter of admiration and dependency I'd built up over the years. And what I saw terrified me, because Vanessa wasn't just a friend with flaws or insecurities. She was someone who had methodically isolated me, undermined me, and then rewritten the narrative to make herself the victim and me the villain. The question was, now that I could see it, what was I going to do about it? I didn't know then that Vanessa had anticipated my awakening, that she had one final, devastating act of sabotage prepared, one that would nearly destroy everything I had worked for. My fellowship documentary project had been progressing alongside my work at Pulse Media. Evenings, weekends, any free hours I could find were dedicated to interviews with women across the media landscape, from veteran newspaper editors to young TikTok creators, all sharing their experiences navigating an industry still dominated by men. The project had become my safe haven, the one area of my life untouched by Vanessa's influence. I hadn't discussed it much with her. Some protective instinct had led me to keep the details private. All she knew was that I was working on it, and that the final cut was due to the fellowship committee in 3 weeks. One Tuesday evening in October, I came home late from an editing session to find Vanessa in our kitchen, a bottle of wine open on the counter. "There she is," she called, her voice slightly too loud, her smile too bright. The documentary filmmaker herself. "Come have a glass with me." I hesitated in the doorway. Things had been strained between us for weeks, our conversations limited to superficial pleasantries and necessary roommate logistics. This sudden warmth felt jarring. "What's the occasion?" I asked, setting down my bag. "Do I need an occasion to share a drink with my best friend?" She poured a second glass without waiting for my response. "Besides, I have news. Good news." I took the wine but remained standing. "What news?" Vanessa's smile widened. "Remember Diane Lewis? The executive producer I met at that industry event last spring? The one who was working on that series about female entrepreneurs." I nodded vaguely. Vanessa had mentioned her once or twice. "Well, she's launching a new media project, a documentary series focused on women in various industries. And she wants to meet with you." I nearly choked on my wine. "With me? Why?" "Because I told her about your fellowship project. Silly. I showed her some of the rough cuts you had on your laptop, and she was impressed. Said it had exactly the tone she's looking for in her series." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "You showed her my rough cuts? From my laptop?" Vanessa waved dismissively. "Just a few clips. Don't worry, I didn't mess with your files or anything. I just wanted her to see your work." My mind was racing. My laptop was password protected, and while I sometimes left it open when I was home, I certainly hadn't given Vanessa permission to access my project files, let alone share them with someone else. "How did you even?" "That's not the important part," Vanessa interrupted, refilling her glass. "The important part is that she wants to meet. This could be huge for you, Emma. A real career opportunity, not just a fellowship project that only academics will see." She was right about one thing. A connection with someone like Diane Lewis could be significant for my career. But the violation of privacy, the presumption. "You should have asked me first," I said finally. "Those files weren't ready to be seen. And you had no right to go through my laptop." Vanessa's expression hardened for a moment before smoothing back into concern. "I was trying to help you. To create an opportunity. I thought you'd be grateful." There it was again. The expectation of gratitude. The implication that anything good in my life must come through her. That I should be thankful for her overstepping boundaries because her intentions were supposedly pure. "I appreciate you thinking of me," I said carefully, "but next time, please ask before sharing my work. Especially unfinished work." She studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. So do you want the meeting or not? She can do lunch next Tuesday." Despite my misgivings, I agreed to the meeting. Whatever Vanessa's methods, this was a professional opportunity one couldn't afford to dismiss. I just need to prepare properly, to make sure whatever rough material Vanessa had shown wouldn't undermine my credibility. Great. I'll let her know. This is exciting, right? Vanessa's smile returned, brilliant and empty. See, I'm still looking out for you, even if you don't think you need me anymore. The next morning, I woke early, determined to review my documentary footage before work. I needed to understand exactly what Vanessa might have shown to Diane Lewis. I opened my laptop, navigated to the project folder, and felt my stomach drop. The files were there, but when I tried to open them, error messages appeared. Corrupted data. Missing links. Somehow, overnight, my carefully organized project had become a digital disaster. Frantically, I checked my external hard drive backup. The files there were intact but several weeks old, missing all my recent edits and interviews. I tried recovery software, file repair tools, everything I could think of, but the results were the same. The most current version of my project, the version I'd been refining for months, was severely damaged. 3 weeks before my deadline, I was essentially starting over from an outdated backup. It could have been a technical glitch, of course. Computers fail. Files corrupt. But the timing, immediately after Vanessa admitted to accessing my laptop, immediately after I'd pushed back against her boundary violation, felt too coincidental. I sat at my desk, staring at the error messages, a cold certainty forming in my chest. Vanessa had done this. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not by deliberately deleting files, but somehow, her unauthorized access had catastrophically damaged my project. When I confronted her that evening, her denial was immediate and indignant. Are you serious right now? You're actually accusing me of what? Sabotaging your project. Why would I do that when I just set up a huge opportunity for you? I don't know, Vanessa. Why would you tell our friends I had a meltdown over you dating Jake Mitchell, when I didn't even know you were dating him? Her eyes widened slightly, the only indication that I'd caught her off guard. What are you talking about? I ran into Maya last month. She told me about the things you've been saying about me. About how I'm unstable, possessive, having some kind of breakdown. Vanessa's expression shifted, her eyes filling with tears. Is that what Maya said? God, Emma, I was worried about you, that's all. You've been so distant, so irritable lately. I might have expressed concern to some friends, but I never called you unstable. The performance was flawless, wounded innocence, genuine concern. If I hadn't seen the pattern so many times before, I might have doubted myself again. Might have apologized for accusing her. I don't believe you, I said quietly. I think you've been trying to isolate me from our friends. And now my project is ruined right after you admit to accessing my files without permission. So what's your theory? That I'm some kind of psychopath who's been plotting against you for years. She laughed bitterly. Do you even hear yourself right now? This is paranoid, Emma. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these thoughts you're having. There it was, the subtle suggestion that I was the one with the problem. That my perceptions couldn't be trusted. That I needed help. I'm moving out, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I'll stay with my cousin in Queens until I find a new place. I'll pay my share of rent until the lease is up, but I can't live here anymore. Over a computer glitch. Vanessa's tone was incredulous. Emma, come on. This is an overreaction. Let's just. It's not just the files. It's everything. The constant criticism, disguised as concern. The way you take credit for my accomplishments. The lies you've told about me to our friends. I'm done. Vanessa stared at me, and for just a moment, something cold and calculating flashed in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by hurt and confusion. If that's how you feel, I guess I can't stop you. She stood, arms crossed protectively over her chest. But when you calm down and realize you're throwing away 7 years of friendship over a misunderstanding, don't expect me to welcome you back with open arms. I packed a suitcase that night and left the next morning while Vanessa was at work. It felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. I had 3 weeks to reconstruct my documentary from the backup files. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, of reaching out to interview subjects to re-record portions, of rebuilding the narrative structure from memory and notes. I also had the meeting with Diane Lewis, which I decided to keep despite everything. When I met her for lunch, I was direct about the situation. I know Vanessa showed you some rough cuts of my project, I said. Unfortunately, I've had a technical issue, and I'm currently reconstructing the documentary from backups. But I'd still love to hear about your series and how my work might align with your vision. Diane looked confused. Rough cuts? Vanessa didn't show me any footage. She just described your project conceptually. Said you were interviewing women across different media positions about their experiences. I stared at her, the pieces rearranging in my mind yet again. So you never saw any of my work? No, though I'd love to when it's ready. Vanessa spoke very highly of your skills, but this lunch was meant to be a preliminary conversation about potential collaboration down the line. Another lie. Vanessa hadn't shown Diane my files at all. She'd made up that story completely, perhaps to justify going through my laptop, perhaps to watch me panic over unfinished work being shared prematurely. And in the process, somehow, my files had been corrupted. As I left the lunch with Diane, which had actually gone well, despite the false pretenses, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Vanessa's manipulation, relief that my work hadn't been shared without permission, determination to finish my project despite the setback, but mostly I felt clarity. For years, I'd been making excuses for Vanessa's behavior, finding ways to blame myself or minimize the harm. Now, finally, I could see the pattern for what it was: deliberate, calculated, malicious. The friendship I'd valued so deeply, the person I'd trusted most in the world, had been slowly, methodically trying to destroy me. And I had nearly let her succeed. The weeks after I moved out were both the hardest and most clarifying of my life. I stayed with my cousin Rachel in her tiny Queens apartment, sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room. The commute to work was longer, the space cramped, the arrangement uncomfortable. But for the first time in years, I could breathe freely without wondering how my words, actions, or achievements might be twisted and used against me. Rachel knew little about the situation, only that my roommate and I had a falling out, but she gave me the space I needed. During the day, I threw myself into my job at Pulse Media. Nights and weekends were devoted to reconstructing my documentary. I barely slept. I rarely ate properly. I was running on adrenaline, determination, and the newfound clarity of seeing my situation for what it was. Vanessa, meanwhile, wasn't going quietly. First came the text messages, alternating between wounded innocence, "I can't believe you would throw away our friendship like this," and thinly veiled threats, "You know I only want what's best for you, but I can't protect you if you push me away." When I didn't respond, she escalated to emails, long, emotional manifestos about how I was making a terrible mistake, how I was clearly unwell, how everyone was worried about me. "Maya even said you seemed paranoid when she ran into you," one email read. "We all just want to help you, Emma. This isn't like you, cutting off people who care about you." The manipulation was so obvious now that I could see it clearly. The way she positioned herself as the concerned friend. The way she weaponized others' perceptions. The subtle suggestions that I was mentally unstable rather than justifiably upset about her behavior. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I reached out individually to the friends I still cared about, not to badmouth Vanessa but simply to maintain connections on my own terms. Some were receptive. Others had fully bought into Vanessa's narrative and kept their distance. It hurt to lose people I'd considered friends, but I was learning an important lesson. Real friendship shouldn't require constant vigilance or walking on eggshells. A week after I moved out, Marcus at Pulse called me into his office. My stomach dropped. Had my work been suffering because of all the personal drama? Was I about to be fired on top of everything else? Instead, he offered me a promotion. The site was expanding its video content, and he wanted me to lead a new series of mini documentaries based on some of my recent articles. "Your piece on digital privacy was our most shared content last month," he said. "And the profile you did of that woman starting coding camps for girls in the Bronx was exactly the kind of storytelling we want to focus on. You have both the journalistic chops and the human touch." I sat there, momentarily speechless. In the midst of all the chaos in my personal life, I'd apparently been doing the best work of my career. "Thank you," I managed finally. "I'm definitely interested." "Great. There's a slight time crunch. We want to launch the first one next month. Do you think you can handle that alongside your fellowship documentary?" I thought about the reconstructed project currently taking shape on my laptop, about the 18-hour days I'd been putting in, about the deadline looming just 2 weeks away. Yes, I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I can handle it. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with yet another email from Vanessa. The subject line read, "Your career." Despite my better judgment, I opened it. Just heard from a contact at Pulse that they're launching a video series. Thought you should know they approached me first to consult on it, but I put your name forward instead. You're welcome. This is what real friends do. Support each other even when they're being treated unfairly. Maybe now you'll realize what you're throwing away. I stared at the message, a familiar mix of confusion and self-doubt washing over me. Had Vanessa really been consulted about the video series? Had she actually recommended me? Should I be grateful? Then I remembered Marcus's words. My articles had been performing well. The promotion was based on my work, my voice, my perspective. Whether Vanessa had been involved or not, and knowing her pattern of lies, she likely hadn't been, the opportunity was the result of my own efforts. I deleted the email without responding and got back to work. The night before my fellowship documentary was due, I finished the final cut at 3 a.m. It wasn't perfect, not as polished as it would have been without the file corruption, but it was powerful. The women I'd interviewed spoke candidly about both the challenges and triumphs of working in media, about the subtle biases and explicit barriers they'd faced, about the changes they'd seen and the progress still needed. As I exported the file, I realized something important. This project, more than anything else I'd done, reflected my unique voice, my perspective, my values. There was nothing of Vanessa in it, no traces of her influence, no compromises made to appease her, no watering down of my vision to avoid outshining her. It was, perhaps, the first thing I'd created that was truly, wholly mine since I'd met her 7 years ago. I submitted the documentary the next morning and collapsed into a dreamless sleep, emotionally and physically drained. When I woke up 12 hours later, I had missed calls from both my fellowship advisor and Vanessa. I called my advisor first. She had already watched the documentary. "Emma, this is remarkable work," she said, "especially given the technical difficulties you mentioned. The interviews are intimate, the narrative structure is compelling, and the perspective is fresh. The committee will be viewing it next week, but I wanted you to know that I'm incredibly impressed." Relief and pride washed over me. Despite everything, the sabotage, the stress, the impossible deadline, I had created something worthwhile. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot, especially after everything." "I know it's been a challenging few months for you," she said carefully. "But sometimes, those challenges shape our work in unexpected ways. Your documentary feels authentic, raw, like you truly understand what these women are talking about when they discuss obstacles and resilience." I hadn't explicitly told my advisor about the situation with Vanessa, but something in her tone suggested she had picked up on the subtext of my technical difficulties explanation. After we hung up, I stared at the notification of Vanessa's missed call. No voicemail, no text explaining why she'd called, just her name on my screen, a digital reminder of her lingering presence in my life. Against my better judgment, I called her back. "Emma." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I didn't think you'd return my call." "What do you want, Vanessa?" A pause. "I heard you submitted your documentary. Congratulations." Something in her tone sent a warning prickle along my spine. "How did you hear that?" "I still talk to Professor Michaels occasionally. He mentioned it." Another claim I couldn't verify. Another assertion of connection and influence. "Well, yes. I submitted it yesterday." "That's great." She paused again. "I also heard you got a promotion at Pulse. Video content, right? That's perfect for you." The way she said "perfect for you" carried an undercurrent of something sour. Resentment? Jealousy? "Thanks," I said neutrally. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss?" "Actually, yes." Her voice shifted, became more businesslike. "I wanted to let you know that I've accepted an offer for the blog. Full acquisition. It's not Pulse, it's a smaller company, but they're growing quickly. The deal includes bringing me on as a content director." I waited, unsure where this was going. "Since you walked away from the blog," she continued, "I'm assuming you don't expect any part of the acquisition payment." but I wanted to check before everything is finalized. Ah, there it was. Money. You're right that I stepped back from the blog, I said carefully. But we never formalized any change in ownership. Legally, we're still co-founders and co-owners. Vanessa's laugh was sharp. Emma, come on. You haven't contributed anything in months. You took a job elsewhere. You abandoned ship. After you tried to force me to sign away most of my ownership. After you had meetings about the blog's future without including me. After you. I stopped myself. There was no point rehashing all of it. What are you saying? That you want half the money for work you didn't do. I thought about the years I'd put into the blog. The late nights writing content, the community building, the technical skills I taught myself to make the site function properly. And I thought about what I'd learned about standing up for myself in the months since I'd moved out. I'm saying we need to reach a fair agreement that acknowledges the work we both put into building the blog from nothing. If you want to discuss what that looks like, I'm open to conversation. Otherwise, we can let lawyers figure it out. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. You've changed, she finally said, her voice oddly flat. Yes, I agreed. I have. Another pause. I'll have my lawyer contact you. After she hung up, I sat holding my phone, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt, self-doubt, and anxiety that usually followed any confrontation with Vanessa. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt calm, centered, sure of myself in a way I hadn't been in years. I had changed, and that change, painful as it had been, was saving my life. They say time heals all wounds. What they don't mention is how that healing actually works, not as a passive process but as active, intentional work. Rebuilding yourself after a toxic relationship isn't about waiting for the pain to fade. It's about consciously reclaiming the parts of yourself that were diminished, twisted, or silenced. In the months after my final phone call with Vanessa, that's exactly what I did. First came the practical matters. After 2 months on Rachel's pull-out couch, I found a tiny studio apartment in Astoria. It was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls at once, but it was mine. My name alone on the lease. My decisions alone about the furniture, the decor, the routines. The blog ownership issue resolved itself more easily than I expected. Vanessa's lawyer contacted me, and I referred him to a college friend who had recently passed the bar. To my surprise, Vanessa agreed to a straightforward 50-50 split of the acquisition payment, far more equitable than the 70/30ths she tried to force on me earlier. Whether she'd reconsidered the ethics of the situation or simply realized that a legal battle would be costly and potentially embarrassing, I never knew. I chose to take the win without questioning it. My documentary won the Fellowship's annual award, which came with a small cash prize and, more importantly, screening opportunities at several film festivals focused on women in media. The recognition led to speaking invitations, networking opportunities, and a level of professional visibility I hadn't anticipated. At Pulse, the video series I'd been tasked with developing found its audience quickly. By the 6-month mark, viewership had grown enough that Marcus expanded my team from 2 people to 5. I was no longer just writing. I was leading, mentoring, shaping the direction of content that reached hundreds of thousands of viewers. On paper, everything was going well. Better than well, my career was flourishing in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. But professionally successful doesn't automatically mean emotionally healed. At night, alone in my tiny apartment, I still replayed conversations with Vanessa in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said, should have realized, should have done differently. I still flinched when receiving criticism at work, waiting for the subtle bar beneath the constructive feedback. I still hesitated before sharing achievements, braced for someone to diminish them or claim partial credit. And I still didn't fully trust my own perceptions. That was perhaps the most insidious legacy of those years with Vanessa, the lingering doubt about my own experiences. Had things really been as bad as I remembered? Was I exaggerating the manipulation in retrospect? Had I contributed to the toxicity in ways I wasn't acknowledging? I knew I needed help processing it all, but I kept putting it off. Until one evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare about Vanessa, I finally made the call. Dr. Taylor was a therapist specializing in relationships and emotional abuse. From our first session, She used terms that both startled and validated me: emotional manipulation, gaslighting, narcissistic patterns. She gave names to the tactics I'd experienced but had struggled to articulate. "What you're describing," she said in our third session, "is a friendship that had many characteristics of an abusive romantic relationship. The isolation from other friends, the undermining of your confidence, the taking credit for your achievements while minimizing your contributions. These are classic patterns of emotional abuse." "But she was my friend," I said, still struggling with the label. "Not my partner." Unfortunately, abusive dynamics can exist in any close relationship: romantic partners, certainly, but also friends, family members, even colleagues. The mechanisms are similar, even if the context differs. Over the next few months, Dr. Taylor helped me understand not just what had happened with Vanessa, but why I had been vulnerable to it in the first place. My natural tendency toward self-doubt, my deep-seated fear of disapproval, my belief that affection had to be earned through achievement or usefulness. "You were drawn to Vanessa's confidence and charisma," she explained, "because those were qualities you felt you lacked. And she was drawn to your empathy and work ethic, qualities she could exploit. It was, in many ways, a perfect storm." The therapy wasn't easy. Unpacking years of manipulation meant confronting painful memories and recognizing patterns I'd been blind to. It meant accepting that someone I had loved and trusted had deliberately hurt me. It meant grieving the friendship I thought I had while acknowledging it had never truly existed in the form I believed. But with each session, the fog lifted a little more. The self-doubt receded. The boundaries I was learning to establish felt less like walls I was hiding behind and more like healthy definitions of my own worth and needs. Outside of therapy, I was slowly rebuilding my social life. Not with the same intensity as before. I'd become more selective, more attentive to red flags, more willing to step back from connections that didn't feel reciprocal. But I was finding my way back to authentic relationships. Maya and I met for coffee regularly, our friendship deepening beyond the superficial connection we'd had in college. My cousin Rachel, who had sheltered me during those desperate weeks after moving out, became a close confidant. And at work, I formed genuine bonds with several colleagues who shared my passion for storytelling. 6 months into therapy, Dr. Taylor suggested an exercise: write a letter to Vanessa expressing everything I had never said. Not to send, just for my own closure. I resisted at first. What was the point of words she would never read? But one rainy Sunday afternoon, I sat down with my laptop and began to type. Once I started, the words poured out in a torrent of anger, hurt, confusion, and ultimately, something approaching compassion. Not for what she had done, but for whatever broken part of her needed to diminish others to feel adequate. "I don't hate you anymore," I wrote toward the end. "Hating you still gives you power over my emotions, and I'm done with that. What I feel now is something closer to pity. Because while I'm learning to trust again, to create genuine connections, to find joy in my own achievements without needing external validation, you're still playing the same games. Still manipulating. Still unable to celebrate others without making it about you. And that seems like a terribly lonely way to live." I never sent the letter. I didn't need to. The act of writing it, of articulating my feelings without fear of retaliation or manipulation, was healing in itself. As autumn turned to winter, and New York transformed under its first snowfall, I found myself thinking of Vanessa less and less frequently. Not because I was suppressing the memories, but because they simply didn't command the same emotional real estate anymore. I was too busy living, developing new projects at work, making weekend trips to visit my family in Ohio, adopting a slightly neurotic rescue cat named Fitzgerald, taking a ceramics class where I created lopsided but cherished mugs and bowls. My life, once defined by a single overwhelming relationship, had expanded into something rich and varied and fully mine. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after I'd moved out of our shared apartment, my phone lit up with a text from a number I hadn't deleted but hadn't used in months. "I saw your latest documentary series on Pulse. Congratulations. It's really good work. V." I stared at the message, waiting for the familiar tightness in my chest, the anxious need to respond immediately, to thank her for noticing, to seek her approval. But it didn't come. I felt only a mild curiosity, like observing an artifact from a previous life. After a moment's consideration, I typed back a simple response. Thank you. No exclamation point. No elaborate expression of gratitude. No invitation to further conversation. Just acknowledgement. Then I set my phone aside and returned to the book I was reading, a memoir written by one of the women I'd interviewed for my fellowship documentary. Her words, not Vanessa's, were what mattered to me now. And in that small moment of choice, of calm response rather than anxious reaction, I knew I had finally broken free. It's been 3 years since I last saw Vanessa. 3 years of growth, healing, and self-discovery. 3 years of rebuilding my life on a foundation of authentic connections and healthy boundaries rather than a single, all-encompassing friendship. I still think about her sometimes, not with the sharp pain of before, but with a kind of contemplative distance. Like examining a photograph from childhood and recognizing yourself while simultaneously feeling removed from that earlier version of your life. I've learned so much in these years, both through therapy and through the daily practice of choosing healthier relationships. If sharing my experience helps even one person recognize and escape a toxic friendship before it causes the damage mine did, then perhaps some meaning can come from those difficult years. So here's what I know now, what I wish I'd understood sooner. Real friends celebrate your successes without making them about themselves. When I got promoted to executive producer at Pulse last year, my friend Maya showed up at my apartment with champagne and takeout from my favorite Thai place. She didn't mention her own career once that evening, not because she doesn't have achievements worth discussing, but because she understood that night was about celebrating mine. Real friends offer criticism constructively and privately, not as public humiliation disguised as just joking. My colleague Damon, who edits most of my scripts now, never includes sarcastic comments or backhanded compliments in his feedback. He points out areas for improvement directly but kindly, always framing his suggestions as ways to strengthen work he already respects. Real friends respect your boundaries without making you feel guilty for having them. When I told my cousin Rachel I needed a weekend alone to decompress after a particularly intense project, she didn't pout or make passive-aggressive comments. She simply said, "Take the time you need. I'm here when you're ready to hang out again." Real friends don't require constant reassurance of their importance in your life. My relationship with my now boyfriend Michael is secure enough that neither of us feels threatened when the other spends time with other friends or pursues independent interests. Our connection isn't weakened by the existence of other meaningful relationships in our lives. It's strengthened by the fullness of our individual experiences. Real friends don't isolate you from others or poison your other relationships with gossip and manipulation. The friendships I've built since Vanessa have formed a network of connection rather than a hierarchy with someone at the center. I can spend time with different friends in different combinations without anyone claiming ownership or priority. Real friends don't make you feel smaller to make themselves feel bigger. In healthy relationships, there's no zero-sum game where one person's success means another's failure. We can all shine without dimming anyone else's light. These lessons seem so obvious now, written out this way. But when you're in the middle of a toxic friendship, especially one that developed gradually over years, the unhealthy dynamics can be nearly impossible to see clearly. The manipulation feels normal. The walking on eggshells becomes second nature. The constant self-doubt seems like a personal failing rather than an intentionally cultivated response. That's why it's so important to talk about toxic friendships openly, to name the patterns, to acknowledge that emotional abuse doesn't only happen in romantic relationships, that sometimes the most damaging people in our lives are those we call our best friends. I see it now in my work, too. The documentary series I created about women in media has evolved into a broader exploration of relationship dynamics and emotional health across various contexts. The episode about friendship, featuring several women sharing stories that paralleled my own experience with Vanessa, received more viewer responses than any other in the series. So many messages from people saying, "This is happening to me right now," or "You just described my best friend," or "I finally have words for what I've been experiencing." Those messages remind me that my story isn't unique. That for every person who finds the strength to break free from a toxic relationship, there are countless others still trapped in the cycle of manipulation, still doubting their own perceptions, still believing that the problem lies within themselves rather than in the dynamic they're caught in. If you're reading this and recognizing your own friendship in these words, please know you deserve better. You deserve relationships that build you up rather than tear you down, that celebrate your uniqueness rather than try to mold you into someone else's shadow, that make you feel more like yourself, not less. Breaking free isn't easy. It's terrifying to walk away from someone who has been central to your life, even when that relationship has become destructive. It's confusing to untangle the good memories from the manipulation. It's painful to accept that someone you loved and trusted was deliberately hurting you. But on the other side of that fear and confusion and pain is the possibility of a life defined by healthy connections, by authentic self-expression, by relationships that nurture rather than diminish. I lost 7 years to a toxic friendship that nearly destroyed me, but I refuse to lose any more. Each day now is an opportunity to choose differently, to surround myself with people who value me for exactly who I am, to maintain boundaries that protect my well-being, to trust my own perceptions without needing external validation. Last week, I was clearing out some old files and found a photograph from sophomore year, Vanessa and me at some gallery opening, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling broadly at the camera. My first instinct was to tear it up, to destroy this reminder of a painful chapter in my life. But instead, I looked at it for a long moment, taking in the genuine joy in my younger self's expression, the hopeful beginning before everything soured. And I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for what could have been if the friendship had been healthy, gratitude for what I've learned through its toxicity, and most surprisingly, compassion for both the naive, eager-to-please girl I was then, and for the manipulative, insecure woman Vanessa must have been beneath her confident facade. I put the photo back in the file rather than destroying it, not to dwell on the past, but to acknowledge it as part of my journey. Those 7 years shaped me, not in the ways Vanessa intended, perhaps, but in ways that ultimately made me stronger, more discerning, more authentically myself. The toxic friendship that almost ruined my life became, in the end, the catalyst for building a better one. A life where I can distinguish between connections that nourish and those that deplete. Where I can offer genuine support to others without keeping score or expecting repayment. Where I can celebrate my own achievements without needing someone else's validation. A life that is, finally and completely my own. If you're still in the shadow of your own Vanessa, know this. There is light waiting for you. There is healing possible. There is a version of yourself, stronger, clearer, more wholly yourself, on the other side of the struggle. And when you find her, she will have been worth fighting for. Real friends lift you up, they don't compete with you, control you, or tear you down. If someone in your life makes you constantly question your worth, walk on eggshells, or apologize for your successes, it's time to reevaluate that relationship. You deserve better. We all do. If you've ever felt smaller around someone who was supposed to be your friend, if you've ever doubted yourself because of how someone close to you treated you, please hit subscribe. Your story matters too, and I want this channel to be a safe space where we can heal together. Drop a heart emoji in the comments if you've escaped a toxic relationship, or share one thing you wish you'd known sooner. Every comment helps the story reach someone who might be trapped in the same situation I was. Remember, you're not alone in this journey.